First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mr. Hightower, and I'm your new music teacher. And I'm your art teacher. And I'm your drama teacher.
The Steve Harvey Show cast reveals what most fans never figured out. For many years, The Steve Harvey Show wasn't just another 90s sitcom, it was a cultural touchstone. Steve Harvey's sharp-tongued humor and larger-than-life personality anchored the series. But it was the ensemble of teachers, students, and friends who gave it heart. To viewers, their chemistry was magnetic, their bond unshakable, and their laughter infectious. But behind the applause and primetime glow lived another truth, a truth the cameras never caught, a truth carefully tucked away behind closed doors. Every rumor was met with silence, every crack in the foundation hidden beneath scripted harmony. Until now. Decades later, the cast begins to speak out, and their confessions about life behind the scenes of The Steve Harvey Show don't just rewrite its legacy. They force us to reconsider what really held the show together: the late nights, the conflicts, the sacrifices, and the secrets buried under the weight of success. But what exactly did the cast reveal that fans never saw coming? And why does it change everything we thought we knew about The Steve Harvey Show? Let's dive in and find out. In 1996, a new sitcom quietly slipped into the lineup of the WB, a fledgling network still fighting to carve out its identity in the crowded world of primetime television. The Steve Harvey Show didn't arrive with the thunderous marketing campaigns of Seinfeld or the endless hype machine behind Friends. It wasn't draped in expectations or sold as the next cultural juggernaut. Instead, it appeared almost cautiously, like a test balloon, as if no one truly expected it to change anything. But within the walls of a fictional classroom at Booker T. Washington High School, something remarkable was about to unfold. A piece of television history was being written, even if no one realized it at the time. At its center was Steve Harvey, a man already climbing the ladder of comedy fame. Harvey had built his reputation on sharp suits, a sharper tongue, and an undeniable ability to command the stage. He wasn't just funny, he was authoritative, a performer who carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was. But sitcoms were a different beast. Networks wanted polish, predictability, and safe, family-friendly laughs. Those were three things Steve Harvey wasn't exactly known for. His humor was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically rooted in the realities of Black life in America. Executives worried it might be too niche, too risky, too real. Yet, what they feared might alienate viewers became the very reason audiences embraced it. Authenticity was its secret weapon, and Harvey refused to let that be diluted. The premise itself seemed almost deceptively simple. Steve Hightower, a washed-up funk musician, accepts a job as a high school music teacher. On the surface, it was a setup tailor-made for a string of goofy antics and predictable plot lines. But under that light-hearted facade lived a sitcom that dared to walk a tightrope between hilarity and heartfelt truth. Students clashed with teachers, dreams clashed with harsh realities. Through all the chaos, Harvey's commanding presence anchored the narrative. By weaving in storylines that reflected real social struggles, poverty, peer pressure, ambition, respect, the show did what few others dared. It spoke directly to an audience who rarely saw their lives portrayed with honesty on network television. But behind the scenes, nothing came easy. While the laughter sounded effortless on screen, the cast and crew were constantly fighting battles most viewers never knew existed. The Steve Harvey Show was not blessed with the resources of NBC or ABC sitcoms. Its budget was tighter, its time slot less glamorous, and its future always uncertain. The writers worked under immense pressure, tasked with creating material that not only satisfied Steve Harvey's razor-sharp comedic instincts, but also appeased executives who demanded broad appeal. It was a delicate balancing act. One misstep could sink the show before it found its footing.
I can't believe they forced me to write all them terrible songs about you. Really tore me up on the inside.
Despite those challenges, audiences could feel the magic. The chemistry among the cast radiated with rare authenticity. Cedric the Entertainer, as Coach Cedric Robinson brought warmth, wit, and perfect comedic timing, quickly becoming the show's heart as much as its humor. The students, brought to life by young talents like Merlin Santana, William Lee Scott, and Laurie Beth Denberg, added their own sparks, making the classroom feel alive, unpredictable, and real. The series was more than just another half-hour of laughs. It became a cultural cornerstone, a place where humor and humanity met in equal measure. And yet, beneath the glow of primetime success, the truth was far less harmonious. The same classroom that entertained millions was also a battlefield. Egos clashed, creative visions collided, careers were quietly made or broken. And looming over it all was the heavy weight of representation, the unspoken knowledge that every joke, every storyline, every character was carrying the burden of showing an America rarely acknowledged on mainstream television. For the viewers at home, the Steve Harvey Show looked effortless, as if the jokes simply rolled off the actors' tongues and the chemistry was lightning caught in a bottle. But the reality was different. It was a fragile balancing act, held together by sheer determination, compromise, and Harvey's unrelenting belief in himself. This wasn't just a sitcom, it was survival. By the mid-1990s, Steve Harvey had already carved out a place as one of comedy's sharpest, most commanding voices. His stand-up routines drew sold-out crowds across the country, his presence on stage larger than life. He was on the verge of true household recognition, and his career seemed destined for greater heights. But sitcom stardom? That was a different world entirely. Comedy clubs gave him freedom, his stage, his rules, his voice unfiltered. Television, however, was a battlefield of executives, advertisers, and ratings charts. For Harvey, stepping into that space meant risking the very edge that had made him a star. Sitcoms offered security. They promised steady paychecks, long-term contracts, and, if the magic formula hit, the golden prize of syndication, a pathway to generational wealth and enduring fame. Yet, there was also a catch. The very nature of network sitcoms demanded accessibility. They had to appeal to middle America, to families gathered around their living room TVs. That meant softer punchlines, cleaner humor, and characters stripped of the grit Harvey had built his name on. For a man whose comedy often thrived in uncomfortable truths, this was dangerous territory. Executives voiced their doubts from the very beginning. Could Steve Harvey, the man who could slice through an audience with raw, biting humor, be reshaped into the mold of a family-friendly sitcom lead? The WB, a young network desperate for a breakout hit, was willing to try, but only under conditions. They wanted a sitcom that was relatable but safe, accessible to a wide range of viewers. They didn't want controversy, they wanted comfort. Harvey, however, had other ideas. He was not about to become just another polished TV personality. The gamble was enormous. For Harvey, saying yes to a sitcom wasn't just a career move, it was a high-wire act with no safety net. If he failed, if audiences rejected a watered-down version of his comedy, his rising career could stall before it even reached its peak. For the WB, the risk was equally great. If Harvey's style didn't translate to television, the network might not only lose money, but also credibility as a platform trying to compete with the giants of NBC, ABC, and CBS. Both sides had everything to lose. The early episodes became a battleground. Harvey pushed for storylines and jokes that reflected real life, especially the realities of Black communities who rarely saw themselves depicted honestly on network television. The WB pushed back, demanding broader humor, lighter tone, and safer story arcs. Writers were caught in the middle, watching as Harvey regularly challenged scripts, sometimes tearing pages apart in frustration. He was known to rewrite scenes on the spot, reshaping them to match his instincts. Some saw this as disruptive and egotistical, but to Harvey, it was survival. If the show didn't feel real, if it didn't sound like him, then audiences would sniff it out immediately and tune out.
How could you tell? I am your Bobo Bakwa. This is my cousin Shakta Bakwa. We are from Rwanda.
And then, something unexpected happened. The gamble paid off. Viewers didn't just laugh at Steve Hightower, Harvey's fictional alter ego. They connected with him. He wasn't a caricature of a teacher crafted for easy laughs. He was flawed, funny, and sometimes deeply frustrated. A man trying to juggle his past as a failed funk musician with the daily grind of keeping a classroom in order. There was honesty in the chaos, and that honesty drew people in. But success came with its own storm. Behind the curtain, Harvey's insistence on creative control sparked tension with writers, producers, and sometimes even co-stars. Some praised him as a visionary who knew exactly what the show needed to succeed. Others whispered that he was difficult, demanding, unwilling to compromise. The line between perfectionism and stubbornness blurred with each new episode. Yet the truth was undeniable. Without Harvey's gamble, without his refusal to dilute himself, the sitcom would never have become what it was. He had bet everything on authenticity. He had risked his career, his reputation, and his relationships behind the scenes. And in the end, the gamble paid off. Steve Harvey had proven that television could bend to his voice rather than the other way around. He had bet on himself, and he had won. While Steve Harvey's name was plastered across the marquee, Cedric the Entertainer was often the one giving the sitcom its heartbeat. As Coach Cedric Robinson, he brought warmth, levity, and an easy charm that softened Harvey's sharper comedic edges. On screen, his timing was impeccable, his humor infectious, and his catchphrases quickly became staples in living rooms across America. Audiences loved him instantly. Critics praised his delivery, often pointing out that his presence balanced the show in ways no one could have predicted. Yet behind the curtain, Cedric was fighting a very different battle. A battle for respect that most viewers never realized was unfolding. At the time, Cedric wasn't the household name he is today. He was a rising comic, respected in stand-up circles but not yet a force in Hollywood. To many network executives, he was simply the sidekick. And that label carried consequences. It meant less money, fewer opportunities to shape storylines, and an unspoken understanding that his role was not to shine, but to support. It was Harvey's show, and Cedric's job was to play along. Yet what executives failed to see, or chose to ignore, was that Cedric's presence was the glue holding the whole production together. Without him, the sitcom risked collapsing under the weight of Harvey's dominance.
I took Regina's autographed ball and I lost it. Man, now I gotta...
You gotta fake your death like my Uncle Willie.
The tension ran deep. Cedric knew his worth, even when Hollywood didn't. He'd sit through script meetings where his characters' jokes were trimmed down, his arcs minimized, his presence in certain episodes questioned. There were times he was told outright that the spotlight had to remain firmly on Harvey. And yet, every week, when the cameras rolled, the audience response told a different story. Viewers adored him. Letters poured in praising the chemistry between Harvey and Cedric, with many fans insisting the best moments of the show came when the two comedians played off one another like dueling jazz musicians, one sharp, one smooth, together creating something electric. Behind Cedric's easy smile and the booming laugh that seemed to brighten every scene, there was quiet frustration. Being underestimated wasn't just an annoyance. It was a reminder of an industry that often reduced brilliant black performers to background players, unless they fit a very narrow definition of leading man material. Cedric's fight wasn't only about ego, it was about survival. It was about carving out a place where his talent couldn't be denied or diminished. Co-stars would later admit that Cedric was the steadying force on set, the one who kept the cast grounded during moments of tension. When Harvey clashed with writers or pushed too hard for control, Cedric was often the one smoothing things over, lightening the mood, and reminding everyone why they were there in the first place. In many ways, his off-screen role mirrored his character on screen, the warm, dependable figure who balanced out the chaos around him. As the seasons went on, the truth became impossible to ignore. Cedric the Entertainer wasn't just comic relief. He was a powerhouse in his own right. Audiences weren't tuning in simply to watch Steve Harvey. Many came for Cedric. By the later years of the sitcom, his reputation had grown so powerful that Hollywood could no longer keep him in the shadows. Offers rolled in, opportunities expanded, and his transition from sidekick to star was well underway. But in those early years, before the wider world caught on, Cedric carried the burden of being underestimated. Every laugh he delivered on screen was sharpened by determination. Every line an unspoken declaration that he was far more than just the man standing next to Steve Harvey. His biggest role wasn't only making people laugh, it was proving, quietly but relentlessly, that he was never anyone's sidekick. Among the young cast of The Steve Harvey Show, one name stood out in particular: Merlin Santana. Charismatic, handsome, and sharp with his comedic timing, Santana breathed life into Romeo Santana, the smooth-talking student with dreams bigger than his classroom.
The smooth-talking, baby-faced charmer from The Steve Harvey Show.
To fans, Romeo was the epitome of cool. He wasn't just comic relief. He was a character that represented aspiration, swagger, and youthful charm. But behind the glow of the spotlight lay a life that would unravel in ways no one could have predicted. Merlin Santana wasn't new to Hollywood. By the time he joined The Steve Harvey Show, he had already appeared on The Cosby Show and Sister, Sister. He was considered one of the most promising young black actors of the 1990s. To industry insiders, the sitcom was supposed to be just one step on a ladder that would eventually carry him to movie stardom. His talent was undeniable, and so was his presence. Yet, with rising fame came rising pressures. Santana was navigating an industry that celebrated his looks, while boxing him into narrow roles. Producers pushed him toward playing the ladies' man stereotype, a limitation that frustrated him as he yearned for more serious opportunities. Still, he pushed forward, determined to prove he could be more than what Hollywood tried to label him as. But his story took a darker turn. Off-screen, Santana's personal life became entangled with the turbulence of Los Angeles nightlife. Friends later revealed how he often struggled to balance his rising fame with the temptations and dangers surrounding him. The streets could be unforgiving, and even for someone with so much promise, the line between Hollywood success and tragic downfall was perilously thin. In 2002, only a few years after the sitcom ended, tragedy struck. Merlin Santana was shot and killed in Los Angeles at just 26 years old. The news shocked his former castmates, who remembered him as vibrant, funny, and destined for greatness. The world mourned a talent taken too soon, but those who knew him best carried an even heavier grief. They saw not just the loss of a star, but the loss of a brother, a friend, and a man who had only begun to show what he was capable of. Merlin Santana's story was a reminder that fame doesn't shield anyone from tragedy. His rise had been meteoric, his future bright, but his fall left a void that could never truly be filled. Behind the laughter of Romeo Santana lay a truth darker than any script could ever capture. On the surface, The Steve Harvey Show was just another sitcom. But behind the closed doors of network meetings at the WB, a different story was being written. One filled with strategy, exploitation, and hidden agendas. The WB, at the time, was a fledgling network, desperately seeking to carve out its identity in a crowded television landscape dominated by NBC, CBS, and ABC. They knew one thing: to survive, they had to tap into audiences that other networks weren't prioritizing. And so, the WB turned to black sitcoms. From The Jamie Foxx Show to Sister, Sister, and eventually The Steve Harvey Show, the network built its early success by centering black voices. But while this looked like progress, insiders whispered about the network's true intentions. Black sitcoms were cheaper to produce, and executives calculated that these shows could deliver consistent ratings without the same financial investment demanded by bigger productions. For Harvey and his cast, this reality became clear quickly. Budgets were tight, sets were limited, and marketing campaigns paled in comparison to the resources poured into the WB's mainstream shows. Even as The Steve Harvey Show pulled in loyal audiences,
American television sitcom The Steve Harvey Show aired on the WB for 6 seasons.
it never received the same push as white-led sitcoms. It was celebrated by fans, but quietly undervalued by the very network it was helping to sustain. Tension brewed behind the scenes. Cast members felt the imbalance. Writers knew they were producing quality work that resonated with millions. But still, their show was treated as a stepping stone for the network rather than a crown jewel. Some even believed the WB deliberately used black sitcoms to gain a foothold in television, only to shift focus later to programs that targeted suburban white audiences. By the early 2000s, the strategy became painfully obvious. As The Steve Harvey Show and other black-led sitcoms ended, the WB pivoted toward shows like Gilmore Girls and Smallville, leaving behind much of the audience that had supported them in their early years. For Harvey and his cast, the writing on the wall was clear. They had been essential, but they were never truly prioritized. It was a bitter truth that behind the laughter and love audiences felt for the show, the network was running an agenda built more on numbers than on nurturing the talent it showcased. Audiences saw camaraderie, chemistry, and laughs. But behind the camera, tension often rippled through the set. The Steve Harvey Show may have looked effortless on screen, but making it happen was anything but smooth. Steve Harvey's dominant personality often collided with the collaborative spirit of television. He was a perfectionist, quick to cut lines, rewrite jokes, or demand changes that would keep the show aligned with his vision. While some respected his instincts, others grew frustrated by his unrelenting control. Writers spoke of late-night rewrites, entire episodes restructured on Harvey's word.
Because you called my house to tell Romeo you were bringing him some supplies.
Some co-stars admired his drive, but others found it exhausting. At times, Cedric the Entertainer acted as a mediator, keeping the peace when tempers flared. Yet even his calming presence couldn't always ease the strain. There were whispers, too. Whispers of jealousy, of actors feeling overshadowed, of opportunities slipping away because the show centered so heavily around Harvey. For younger cast members like Merlin Santana and William Lee Scott, it could feel suffocating, as though their contributions were minimized. But the tension wasn't only about egos, it was also about the weight of representation. Everyone knew how important the show was to its audience. Every misstep, every conflict carried the fear of derailing something bigger than themselves. Cast members bore the burden of knowing they weren't just making a sitcom, they were shaping how Black life was represented to millions of viewers. The pressure was immense, and the cracks sometimes showed. Arguments broke out, scripts were scrapped. Behind the laughter lay sleepless nights and strained relationships. And while the sitcom remained a success, those who lived it knew the cost. The Steve Harvey Show was built on laughter, but its backstage story was one of struggle, compromise, and the unrelenting tension of trying to balance art, ego, and responsibility. If Steve Harvey was the star, Cedric the Entertainer was the soul. His portrayal of Cedric Jackie Robinson,
Hi there. My name is Cedric Robinson.
the affable gym teacher, gave the Steve Harvey Show its heart. Audiences adored him, his warmth, his comedic timing, and his effortless ability to turn even the smallest moment into a laugh-out-loud scene. But what fans never saw was how Cedric's rise during the sitcom began to overshadow the show itself. By the late 1990s, Cedric wasn't just a sitcom actor. He was hosting BET's Comic View, headlining comedy tours, and becoming a household name in his own right. Hollywood came calling with film roles and bigger projects, and suddenly, the gym teacher from Booker T. Washington High was stepping into the spotlight as one of the most bankable names in comedy. This rise created a delicate dynamic on set. While Harvey had built the show around himself, Cedric was quickly becoming an equal draw. His charisma wasn't confined to the script, it was magnetic, and executives knew it. Some insiders whispered about power struggles, about Harvey feeling threatened as Cedric's star began to burn brighter. Yet, despite the quiet friction, Cedric managed to remain grounded. He was beloved by his co-stars and often played the role of peacemaker when tensions flared behind the scenes. His humor wasn't just for the cameras. It kept the atmosphere lighter during long shooting days. But even Cedric's loyalty couldn't mask the truth. He was destined for more. By the time the Steve Harvey Show ended, he had already launched into films like Barbershop and the original Kings of Comedy. For Cedric, the sitcom wasn't the pinnacle, it was the launchpad. What most fans never realized was that while they were laughing along with Mr. Robinson, they were watching a comedian on the cusp of taking over Hollywood. When people think of the Steve Harvey Show, they immediately picture Harvey, Cedric, or Merlin Santana. But the sitcom's tapestry was woven with a host of other characters, some beloved, some overlooked. And in the shadows of the leads, these cast members lived a very different story. Wendy Raquel Robinson, who played Principal Regina Piggy Greer, brought fire and flair to the series. Her chemistry with Harvey was electric, often carrying subplots that gave the show its romantic tension. But behind the curtain, Robinson often struggled with the reality of being typecast. Hollywood saw her as the sharp-tongued, no-nonsense character and rarely offered roles that reflected her full range. Though she would later shine in the game, the years between were quieter than anyone expected. Then there was William Lee Scott, who played Bullethead. His goofy persona was a staple of the show, yet his career after the sitcom never reached the same heights. For Scott, the shadow of his character seemed impossible to escape. The industry often forgot him, just as fans sometimes did, consumed by the brighter lights of Harvey and Cedric. Even the recurring student characters, Lydia, Sophia, and Stanley, struggled to find footing once the cameras stopped rolling. Some faded entirely from Hollywood, their time on the sitcom becoming both a blessing and a cage. It's a sobering reminder. In every hit series, there are stars who shine brightly and others who flicker unnoticed. For much of the supporting cast of The Steve Harvey Show, their contributions were quietly overlooked, leaving fans unaware of how much they had sacrificed for the laughter that became a part of television history. To fans, the end of The Steve Harvey Show in 2002 felt abrupt. Ratings were solid, characters beloved, and storylines still full of potential. So why did a sitcom with such loyal viewership suddenly vanish from the screen? The truth was far more complicated than the clean explanations offered at the time. Behind the scenes, fatigue had set in. Harvey was juggling multiple careers, stand-up tours, television appearances, and the beginnings of his empire that would later include radio and hosting gigs. For Cedric, Hollywood was calling louder than ever. The cast, though committed, began to feel the weight of an uncertain future, with whispers that the WB no longer prioritized black sitcoms the way it once had. Network politics played a massive role. As the WB pivoted toward shows like Gilmore Girls and Smallville, executives saw Harvey's sitcom as expendable. Budgets tightened, and renewal negotiations became tense. Some insiders even suggest that Harvey himself pushed for an end, preferring to exit on his own terms rather than watch the show wither under a network that had already moved on. For fans, the ending left questions. For the cast, it left a sense of unfinished business. Yet in hindsight, the timing was perhaps inevitable. The show had run for 6 seasons, cemented its cultural mark, and launched careers. To drag it further might have risked diluting what had made it special in the first place. The abruptness masked a truth. The Steve Harvey Show ended not because audiences let go of it, but because the industry did. 2 decades later, The Steve Harvey Show remains more than just a sitcom. It's a cultural touchstone. It shaped the careers of Harvey, Cedric, and Robinson, left behind the tragedy of Merlin Santana, and introduced millions of viewers to a brand of comedy rooted in community, mentorship, and resilience. Yet its legacy is complicated. For years, black-led sitcoms were sidelined, dismissed as niche, despite their massive influence. And while The Steve Harvey Show helped the WB rise to prominence, it was never celebrated as the cornerstone it truly was. Fans who grew up with the show remember the laughs, but what they didn't see were the sacrifices, the tensions, the lost opportunities, and the bittersweet endings of so many who worked on it. Today, Steve Harvey's global success keeps the memory alive. Cedric's continued prominence reminds audiences where he came from. And in the echoes of Romeo's charm, Merlin Santana is immortalized, forever young, forever full of promise. The sitcom's legacy isn't just about what aired, it's about what it revealed and what it hid. It was a story of triumph shadowed by tragedy, laughter underscored by struggle, and a cultural milestone that fans never fully realized they were witnessing. And perhaps that is the Steve Harvey Show's greatest secret, that behind the laughter, the sitcom was shaping history, leaving a legacy no one figured out until long after the cameras stopped rolling. If the lessons felt too sharp to ignore, should we take them as sitcom wisdom or look closer at the truths quietly tucked behind the punchlines? Decades later, the cast of The Steve Harvey Show finally reveals what most fans never figured out. But how much we believe depends on how closely we've been listening all along. Before time fades the echoes of that classroom bell, remember, behind every laugh was a story never meant to leave the set. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.